what's up? I'm Brian here doing another video for you guys, and this time I want to do something for quite a while, and I'm actually doing it now. This is going to be a very rambling video, but I just wanted to show off the entirety of the first wave of the Transformers War for Cybertron Siege collection, which pretty much also kickstarted the entirety of the War for Cybertron trilogy. Anyways, I've got the entire first wave. I don't have every single figure in the War for Cybertron trilogy itself. Some things are harder to get, but at least I got the first wave, and we're going to talk about that and just see exactly how well they did in starting off the entire toy line. Anyways, the first thing I want to bring up is, of course, the smallest thing. We've got the Battlemasters. Now, originally these were called Target Masters, but I guess because some of them aren't really targeting weapons, you know, some of them are guns, some of them are blades and weapons, or axes, I should say, they decided to change the name to Battlemasters, and that kind of makes sense. So these could be wielded by other mainline Transformers. They used the 5mm port systems, and they were kind of cool. They are also, for the most part, original characters. You got Fire Drive, which came from the original Hot Rod from Generation 1. You got Blowpipe, which originally came with Trigger Happy, and then you got Lionizer, which came out in the Action Masters lineup. But what was cool about Fire Drive and Blowpipe, what's cool about these in general is that they were super cheap to get, but in these two in particular, from the previous waves, we actually had the figures that these were supposed to come with. So we had a Titans Returns Hot Rod, and we had a Titans Returns Trigger Happy, so that was nice to complete the setup. But not only that, it was Hasbro's introduction in going into the Target Master lineup, and I thought that was pretty cool. There are a lot of Target Masters out there that they could still do, and it is unfortunate that they haven't really done them, but it is nice to see that they decided to dive in, at least for a little bit, and we got some pretty cool toys. You know, they transform into the weapons, and they were nice, and we also had the Lionizer, which was pretty cool, the introduction that we would also get animalistic characters. They wouldn't all be based on a singular wave or lineup of Target Masters, and I thought it was nice. Even though he should be technically orange, they did make up for that later on. It's still a nice thing to get. Not only did they introduce this, but they were the first Transformers line in, well, they pretty much made it a big deal to have flare effects. So we had this slashing effect from the Lionizer, which I thought was pretty cool, and they should really do more slashing effects. Don't know why they haven't. And we have this blast effect from Blowpipe, which is a two-piece setup, and then we have these two pieces from the Fire Drive, and they interact with the weapons not only here, but with the mainline weapons themselves. So if you had Hound, he had blast ports all over the thing, so you can attach these like they're taking on fire, and they could also be used on the weapons from the main figures themselves. So that was kind of nice. So that's the smallest lineup, but not only that, we had some other characters that were pretty small. We had the Micromasters, which was something that was asked for quite a while, and I think they did okay. They could have done better, but it is interesting to note what they did. So we got this Autobot Patrol. I forgot some of the names. I know some people are going to correct me. I can go onto TF Wiki if I really need to, but we've got this Autobot Race Car Patrol. I think that's what it is. But yeah, this was Road Handler and Swindler. We also had this, I think it was the Battle Patrol. I think that's what it was called, with Flack or Flake and oh no, this is Big Shot, this is Flake, or Flack, whatever you want to call him. And then we also had a Decepticon 2-pack with, what is it, Cloudburst and Visper? Yeah, some of the names get lost on me with the Micromasters, but they were pretty cool. They also introduced a new setup for the Micromasters that they would also combine to turn into weapons. Some of them didn't really work out too well. I think that this is probably the best weapon setup that you're going to get out of any of the line. Yeah, it was a nice thing. I've wanted Micromasters for a while. They're about the same height as, I believe, the original Micromasters, so that was pretty cool. But to have a Generations-themed Micromaster setup was nice. And they also come with the blast, or don't come with the blast effects, but they come with certain ports that would also interact with the blast effects. And another cool thing that I think is awesome is that they're about the same height as the Battlemasters, so that was a nice thing to bring in. I also want to point out that with every wave that Siege introduced, because it started off a whole new line, they had at least one Autobot and one Decepticon, which I thought was a nice idea to kickstart a whole series. Anyways, moving right along, we also have the Deluxe class figures. So the first one I want to take a look at is Hound, because he was actually the first figure that I got in the Siege line. So what was cool about these figures is, again, they had blast ports all over the figure, so if you want to make it look like they were taking heavy damage, you could totally do that. That's not a blast port, that's a blast port. But you could also have them fire off from the weapons. It was a nice gimmick that was well-rounded and also brought everything together, especially when you have certain holes all over the place. So, unfortunately, the prices went up for Deluxes, Voyagers, and Leaders, and whatnot, and it really soured the mood for me, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to get into Siege. While I do like the idea that there's Cybertronian alt modes because it's the G1 with a little bit of a twist, and that's been a thing for generations for the past while, especially since the Classics lineup, it just felt like it was retreading too much with Optimus Prime, Megatron, and Hound and whatnot. And again, they were expensive, so I wasn't sure if I really wanted to get it. Hound was the figure that actually changed my mind entirely and made me fall in love with the Siege line. Not only do I really appreciate the quality of the figure, but the articulation is fantastic. They added new joints to the figures. We get some basic things going on for the Deluxe class lineup, but here, now, sometimes you get wrist articulation. It'd be casual to get waist articulation. In fact, it'd be rare not to get it, and you also get foot tilt nowadays. And this was all incorporated in a figure that is able to transform. Not only that, I mean, the weapon portholes is fantastic, but there's also different configurations with the weapons. You can attach different weapons, you can use different blast effects. Like, you can change up a lot with this. There was just so much to unpack, and I love the design of Hound. I think he's fantastic. Honestly, this figure won me over, and I think Siege is one of my favorite toy lines to date. But we don't just have Hound in the Deluxe class toy line. Another basic Autobot, we have Sideswipe, which, if you're going to start off the line with some basic characters, Sideswipe seems to be a good one. You know, he is kind of a basic Autobot, which is nice. You know, he's got the red, white, and black, and he's a basic Autobot card, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's bad. He comes with a couple of interesting weapons. It would be nice if he came with the rifle, which they eventually put in with the Lambo car, but overall it's not bad. Also, they had these scratch marks on the toys, which some of them worked, some of them didn't, but I think overall it was fine, but I'm glad that they decided, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. But not only that, with the weapons gimmick and the 5mm port system, we had figures that would actually turn into weapons. So we had this. This is Cog, and he completely breaks up to form different weapons. The arm breaks up, of course the weapons are 5mm port system, so you can use that, but the legs and the torso, it all comes apart to convert into different weapons for your mainline figures. So not only did you have the Battlemasters or the Micromasters, but you had a full-on Deluxe figure. And what else was cool about these is if you had any of the previous Titans, you had the little guys to go with this, because Cog in particular was the original figure that came with Fortress Maximus. He was the little drone that drove around the set. So it was a nice introduction, and I'm glad they started with a simple figure. You know, I think Cog is relatively basic when it comes to the weaponizers, so I think that was a nice touch and very nice, and he definitely fits with the weapon aesthetic, because, I mean, look at those shoulders. And then last but not least, we needed to add at least one Decepticon, so they did bring us Skytread, which I think is a nice little figure to add to the line. He was also a Duocon, which kind of goes well with the Cog figure, because Cog actually separates into two different vehicles that can combine, but you can have the separate forms, so it kind of works alongside Skytread. And this was a nice figure, especially considering that in the previous lineup, we actually got the other Duocon. While this one doesn't separate to form different robots, this one's more of the classic look. And not only that, the shaping was fantastic. I mean, look at the torso right here. There's a couple of tricks to it that they didn't really need to put in, but they did, and I think it won me over, and I think he's a fantastic Decepticon. The funny part about it is, in the main line, he's probably the weakest one. He doesn't really have the spotlight, but he's still a fantastic toy, which really is telling of the entire toy line. Alright, just changing the camera angle, we also have the Voyager class figures. Again, we have one Autobot and one Decepticon, which is fantastic. And because the lineup just started, we needed to bring in the leaders, so it was fantastic to bring in Optimus Prime. Now, again, these are supposed to be Cybertronian alt forms, but very heavily inspired by their classic look. So you could tell that this is Optimus Prime right off the bat, but his truck mode had different details that would jet away from the classic look, but you can see the classic look is still there. And I really love this version of Optimus Prime. I mean, I love the Earthrise one that came out recently, but I still have a place for this Siege version. I just think that the details are nice. I especially love how the wheels fold into the body. I think that's nice. I love the axe, I love the rifle, and the transformation is actually quite creative. Even though he does have quite a bit of a backpack and some kibble on his arms, I think that overall it does look pretty good, and I'm very impressed with what they did with the Optimus Prime in this line. But of course, you gotta have Optimus Prime, you gotta have Megatron for the starting lineup, so they did produce a Megatron. Now, they couldn't really do the gun mode from the original toy, so instead they opt out for the tank, which I'm totally fine with. I mean, with mass shifting and the size of the little gun, it kind of didn't really make sense anyway, so I think that this is fair. And I think he looks really impressive. He is definitely not perfect, but I think he was one of the best Megatron molds to come out for the Generations line as of recent. In fact, I think he might be the best. You know, there's some things I like about the Earthrise toy, but look at that sword. It looks fantastic, and I love how it integrates into the alt mode. The shape of the head is mean and aggressive, and I like it. The one thing I don't like is the splat effect with the gunmetal. It just doesn't really work with the flat gray, but they well and make up for it because we've had future repaints of the toy that's got a more metallic deco. So I think that this is a nice starting off point. The fusion cannon is wonderful too. It doesn't have this obnoxious gimmick getting in the way. It's just a fusion cannon. And of course he's got all the portholes and whatnot. Another cool thing about the toy line is you start to notice that some of the size started to change for some of the figures. They weren't always going to be the same height. Optimus Prime and Megatron kind of feel very different. Megatron feels beefier and bulkier compared to Optimus Prime, and that would be a thing that would continue in the toy line. Now, the one concerning thing that came out for the Transformers Generations toy line was the leader class toys, because that's where the size really hit hard, especially considering that the prices were going up. So I'm going to start off with Ultra Magnus, just because I think he's a good starting off point with the leader class, and he is definitely smaller compared to the older leader class toys. He also doesn't have any electronics and whatnot, but I think people were okay with this because of the amount of parts he has. All this was like an assembly of a toy, and yes, you might not like parts forming, but that's kind of the case with Ultra Magnus. He was kind of the parts forming figure. And I think they did a pretty decent job with the details. He's definitely a bulky figure, but I definitely really do like him. I've always taken a liking to Ultra Magnus, and it's no different here. There are certain things I like more in the Combiner Wars one, but I think that this is a really nice, very solid toy. I mean, I could pose this around and do whatever with the articulation. He also had a bunch of weapons, which was very nice. And he had the core Optimus Prime inside there, so that's very cool. I also do love the blue windscreen and the head sculpt. I really do like. I think that this Ultra Magnus is one of the best figures to come out in the first wave. But not only that, we had one of my favorite characters to date, if you guys know me. We also had Shockwave. So it seemed like the weapon setup was going to be a gimmick for the leader class toys. It was kind of like a combination of putting Cog with a Voyager class figure. So what they did here is they decided to add this setup to Shockwave. And some people don't like it because it just seems obnoxious. You could add just a Voyager class Shockwave and nobody would be concerned about that. But to that I want to argue, what would really designate him for the Siege toy line? Because weapons were a big play pattern for the toy line. if Shockwave doesn't really have a weapon other than his laser arm, which is cool enough, but it's not really an attachable thing, he doesn't really feel fit with the overall toy line, so I kind of get it. It's probably a little bit much, but you know, I think it's fine, and it actually works out pretty well in my opinion. I get why people would just want the core Shockwave figure, I totally understand that, but I think the weapon setup isn't too bad either. And I'm totally fine with it, and I love the details on this toy, especially the head sculpt. The coloring is nice, and one good thing I could say about the Shockwave is it's finally a Generation Shockwave. The previous one we got was a Combiner Wars little tiny guy. It was the Legends class toy that turned into the weapon. That was pretty much the size to be held for some of the Combiner figures, which was a nice touch, but it wasn't in scale with any of the larger figures, and we definitely wanted that. And by this point, we finally got that. So yeah, I definitely do like it. Maybe they could have just made him a handheld weapon at this size, but I don't think it would really work out. So, with that out of the way, that is pretty much the entirety of the first wave of Siege. What is my opinion on the lineup? I think that it's a good kicking off starting point. I think that the quality was fantastic. It pretty much gave you an idea of what they were going for. But not only that, it gave you some obscure things while also bringing in some really recognizable things. I mean, you know, Sideswipe, Hound, Optimus Prime, Megatron, you know, those are pretty much generic characters that have been seen quite a few times. But Generations Cog, Generations Skytread, Micromasters, Battlemasters, another Ultra Magnus that's really good, a full-size Shockwave, that was fantastic. And it really opened up the possibility, and it seemed like Hasbro was listening more as to what characters we want, because we've got some really obscure repaints. I mean, this as a Power Dasher, that was quite surprising. So I think that this was pretty good. So with that out of the way, that is pretty much it. I thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and all those fun doodads. And I will see you guys next time.